You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah.
I don't think the 60s would have happened, the music, the art, the literature, unless it was for LSD. Everybody took this pill and went on this big trip, and it changed their minds.
I'll never forget the first time I got high. It was like a revolution in my brain.
Timothy Leary said the wrong thing. He said, turn on, tune in, drop out. What was actually happening was turn on, tune in, take over.
Things just snowballed, having different ideas about respect for authority, different ideas about sex, and different ideas about drugs.
These battles are still being fought. This is not ancient history. This is stuff that's being fought out right now.
Break on through to the other side, 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 break on through. Please search warrant.
Lies a controversial
and other kinds of unconventional weaponry. As part of this LSD experimentation, they would go into bars and they would squirt it into people's drinks, and then they would bring them back to a so-called safe house where they had one-way mirrors, and they would be behind that mirror making notes about how these people responded.
Reefer! You know what day it is today, Cap? Yeah. What? What day of the week? Wait a minute.
Around the time that the CIA is doing their mind control experiments, Timothy Leary was the faculty sponsor of research with psilocybin at Harvard.
Psilocybin was the synthetic extract of the psychoactive molecule magic mushrooms. And in the early 1960s at Harvard, Timothy Leary, this tweedy professor, started gathering these bright young scholars around him, and they began taking the substance.
The effect is somewhat like looking through a microscope. Suddenly, you discover that there's an invisible world around you that you hadn't known about before you did it. The same thing is true with a psychedelic drug. You're aware of processes that are going on inside your own brain.
Leary and his colleagues believed that psilocybin was revolutionary and that it could really remake human thought and society.
The doctors wouldn't like that because it would be throwing their game of medicine into dramatic revision. The ministers and priests wouldn't like it because there's a new conception of the divine process that's not in the Bible.
And suddenly the media had discovered this really interesting story. Students and teachers taking these wild, mind-altering drugs together, and it was very controversial.
Our aim, like the aims of any religious group just beginning, is to transform American society. It's an insane asylum over here, and it's our goal to lift the spiritual level of the American people. We're going to try to bring about a religious renaissance and a spiritual revolution.
Tim Leary sort of wanted everyone to have it, and he, to a large extent, was personally responsible for introducing psychedelics to, America at large.
I have to say, maybe I wouldn't have taken LSD if I hadn't have read his literature about it. He gave me some of the intellectual grounding to feel safe about it. Certainly among everyone I knew, there was a deep spiritual curiosity, and most people took their LSD trips seriously. And certainly those first couple of trips are mind-blowing. Suddenly you're seeing the effect of raw, unfiltered information coming in.
A lot of people were caught off guard by how powerful their LSD experiences were, both positive and negative, difficult and easy.
It's like playing with a shotgun, and personally, I don't want to die.
You completely lost all sense of being, and the only thing that you were conscious of was the barrage of the senses, the feeling of the brain with all the nerves sending barrages of experience into your brain and the nerves going into the neck, and how the nicest thing that you could possibly think of would be to cut those nerves off, to cut off that experience, to die. It was 50-50. Half of it was very nice.
The motto of our religion and what we're advising all Americans is turn on, tune in, and drop out. Now, this may sound rather shocking. Actually, this is the oldest religious metaphor and statement which teachers have passed on for thousands of years.
Tim Leary truly believed that these drugs could bring about a more direct access to the Godhead. At the same time, on the West Coast, you have this character, Ken Kesey, and he begins pursuing what is essentially the recreational sports approach to the psychedelic experience.
I've always thought that this is one of those things that proves that God has a sense of humor. That if Gabriel come up and says, hey, Chief, the Americans are really messed up down there. We're going to have to do something to straighten them out. They've got a nosedive karma going on. And God says, well, send them some of that stuff you've been working on, that acid stuff, and have the CIA distribute it. You can hear the celestial laughter.
Ken Kesey was a writer, and he was a student at Stanford, and he was part of experiments at the VA hospital there. For money, they could take these experimental drugs, including LSD.
And my metaphor for the thing was, it's as though these people had discovered a room, and they thought there was something in that room of value to them, but they didn't want to go in there. So they hired students to go in there, and after a number of those students came out with a wild look in their eye, they said, close up that room and don't let anybody.
So I want to take some LSD. I want Babs to take some. Cassidy, you want to take some?
There was a kind of antic, surreal, fun quality to being these kind of psychedelic pranksters. It became a big joke on straight culture.
Sleep all day, drive all night. Brain my numb, can't stop now. For sure ain't no doubt. Keep open mind, let it all hang out.
When they were all high and they were all plugged in, it seemed like the bus became this one consciousness through space and light and time, and that was what they called group mind. And that was very much the concept that they were going after when they got back from the bus trip and they decided to begin the acid tests. Suddenly, these leaflets started appearing up and down the coast around the Bay Area with these cryptic words, "Can you pass the acid test?" And what the acid tests were was the first multimedia mass acid experience.
During the time that Kesey was experimenting with it, LSD was manufactured as a legal drug. So he became sort of the Pied Piper to the psychedelic culture that was growing up in the San Francisco area at that time.
The commencement exercises for LSD
but don't come unless you're willing to be dosed. It's like the acid and the squirt guns, the people who could like hit your Dixie cup from 20 feet, you know. There's an art form.
This is the house of a popular local band which plays hard rock music. They call themselves the Grateful Dead.
What we're thinking about is a peaceful planet. We're not thinking about anything else. We're not thinking about any kind of power. We're not thinking about any of those kind of struggles. We're not thinking about revolution or war or any of that. That's not what we want. Nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to hurt anybody. We would all like to be able to live an uncluttered life, a simple life, a good life, you know, and like think about moving the whole human race ahead a step or a few steps.
Do you think that your movement or your idea, the hip idea, is essentially connected up with drugs?
Yeah, I would say that's a large part of the framework.
I think that most of the people who are hippies now came to it through drugs.
Yeah, but it's not a dope movement. We're not trying to spread dope.
I think, personally, that the more people turn on, the better world it's going to be.
What happened in the Haight-Ashbury had a lot to do with the fact that in the San Francisco Bay Area, there was already a tradition of taking psychedelics. There were some people who actually made some, but they were always thinking small. They were always thinking, basically, I don't want to get busted. In the spring of 1964, I was living at a weird little rooming house in Berkeley, and this guy named Owsley Stanley moved in. He was a very extraordinary guy. He had paintings. He was a ballet dancer. He had a complete beekeeping costume. He was also a trained blacksmith. He was different from a lot of the other people who got into psychedelics who said, boy, you could make this stuff, that would be cool. Owsley's way of thinking was to do things boldly. So he just went out there and bought raw lysergic acid in large quantities. Huge quantities. He made several million doses of LSD. So the San Francisco scene became basically the biggest LSD party in history.
This hippie girl may be giving people free doses of LSD.
You've shared the ups.
You are my family.
And the downs.
You're gonna put this on national television! You!
At last, the time has come for Chris and Adrian to say, I do. It's the wedding we've all been waiting for.
She's the love of my life.
Please join us for this very special VH1 event. My Fair Brady, the wedding special, premieres this Sunday at 9 on VH1.